Okay, so the first Mishnah of Masechet Rosh Hashanah, which means the new year, actually gives us that there's four different kinds of heads of the year or beginning of the year. So on the first of Nisan, first of the month of the spring, is the new year for kings. Um, It is from that date that the years of a king's rule are counted. So, for example, even if a king started ruling on the 29th of Adar, that will be already counted as 1 year, and the first of Nisan, the following day, will be counted as year two. And it's also the first year for the festivals, which means that if you have made a vow to bring an offering to the temple, you have the three pilgrimage holidays, but it starts with Pesach. So if you made the vow on Shavuot, technically you only have Shavuot and Sukkot to bring it, as it determines which is considered the first festival of the year and which is the last. And the first of Elul is a new year for animal tithes. So the Torah tells us that you have to pass all of your sheep through a small gate, which reminds us actually of Rosh Hashanah. And every 10th one that was born that year, you paint it with a red broad brush in order to make sure that you know that that's the tithe that is going to be brought. And Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say the new year for animal tithes is actually the first of Tishrei, so they argue about that specifically. Another argument is on the first of Tishrei, the new year counting for years, as will be explained in the Gemara, for calculating sabbatical years and jubilee years, i.e., from the first of Tishrei, there is a biblical prohibition to work the land during these years for planting and for vegetables. On the first of Shvat is the new year for the trees, and of course, we celebrate on the 15th of Shvat because this is in accordance with the statement of Beit Shammai, but Beit Hillel say the new year for trees is on the 15th of Shvat. So what it really means is because the rain for this year's fruit, meaning the summer fruit, only affects after the 15th of Shvat, and because the shaked or the shkedia, the tree of the almonds, starts blossoming, then that's how we know that it will be the new year. So most of these we already know, and so the question basically is, what is the meaning of the Rosh Hashanah that we use today for our prayers? So the sages disagree about when the world, or the first, or more precisely, the first human was created. Rabbi Yoshua maintains that it was the first of Nisan, as the Torah refers to Nisan as the first month in chapter 12 of Exodus. Rabbi Eliezer maintains that it was the first of Tishrei. This disagreement reflects the hidden character of Rosh Hashanah, which leads to a dispute about what happened on this date. The Rishonim explain that both opinions are correct. God thought about creating the world on the first of Tishrei and actually created it on the first of Nisan. The only applicable disagreement in that way is about the Mabul, about the flood. So when it says B'chodesh Hashini, are we talking about the second month from creation, which means Mar Cheshvan, or are we talking about the second month from Nisan, which means month of Iyar? Okay, so this disagreement is about which day we should consider primary, the day that God, as it were, thought of creating the world, or the day that he actually created it. That's according to Rabbeinu Tam. The sages tell us that we follow Rabbi Eliezer in practice, which is why the Rosh Hashanah prayers read This day is the beginning of your works. Zayom Tchilat Masecha, a commemoration of the first day. And yesterday we talked about how this is a Yom Zikaron, whether because we remember the blowing the shofar or because it's actually a remembrance that Hashem has for this day because of the binding of Isaac and the birth of Isaac and all kinds of other things that happened on this day. In any event, I'll agree that God judges his world and creates the new year on the first of Tishrei. This is why it is called Rosh Hashanah, literally the head of the year, as everything which happens in the course of the year is a result of what happens then. The halachic significance of Rosh Hashanah as the new year pertains to the dating of contracts, counting years for Shemitah and Yovel, and separating Trumot and Maasrot. We shall now explain. So before we explain, I'll just give you one example from a movie that I watched, and it's called The Black Knight. It's a comedy, not the other Black Knight, which is drama, and he basically goes back in time to the 14th century, and when he realizes that he's not in his own time, he says to the girl, "What year are we in?" And she tells him, "We are in the year of the Lord, ta ta ta." So the Jewish way was basically following the idea that this is the first day for kings. So obviously she did not mean the Lord Hashem, but that's how the new year is referred to as it pertains to Hashem being the sovereign of the universe. Every contract must be dated, as it must be clear when the obligations it entails begin. Predated contracts are invalid. So if somebody says, my field is yours, 6 months before I die, that is invalid because there's a different obligation. The first of Tishrei is the new year for documentary purposes. During the times of the Amoraim and Geonim, contracts were dated according to the Seleucid era, what's called Minyan Shtarot. At the end of that era, Jews began dating documents from the world's creation. This is the current practice for all contracts, including marriage and divorce documents. So in the Ketubah, it says on on this day of the week, this day of the month, of this year, which we count here in the place that it's being written. And just to clarify something from the Rambam says that we are approximately 150 years off, and he doesn't say which direction. So if you count the years in Bereshit, from the creation of Adam until Abraham. Abraham was born in the year 1948. Isaac was born in the year 2048. The Exodus from Egypt was 400 years later in 2448. And then it says that 480 years later in the book of Kings, it says that that's when the first temple was established. But our rabbis tell us in a different source that the first temple only stood for 410 years and the second temple for 420. So how do you reconcile 586 BC, which was the date of the expulsion from Jerusalem, with the year 70 AD of the building of the destruction of the second temple? And so that's about 150 years that we're missing. So we'll never know until Mashiach comes and tells us exactly where it is. Likewise, when years were counted to determine sabbatical and jubilee years, the year began in Tishrei, and that's according to Halacha in Rosh Hashanah. We are also commanded to separate Trumot and Masrot from the produce of each year. One may not tithe from the produce of one year for the produce of another, and that's why we have to know when Rosh Hashanah Leilanot is the new year for the trees. You shall set aside every year a tenth part of all the yield of your sowing that is brought from the field. That's in Deuteronomy 14:22. Rosh Hashanah is when the new year begins for this purpose, to understand how to do the tithing properly and securely. So,